Massive changes to college football. The ACC has settled with Clemson and Florida State. Plus, speaking of massive changes, Notre Dame is looking to change their NIL.
Locked On presents The Portal, the daily podcast covering college football recruiting and everything NIL. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back into The Portal. I am your host, Brian Smith, longtime college football recruiting analyst and writer. Thank you for making The Portal your first listen each and every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. And today's going to be fun because finally, the ACC has settled with Clemson and Florida State. What does that mean for them with all that extra change in their pocket? And speaking of money, Notre Dame and NIL, they're changing their approach as well. And to help us figure it all out, my guy, John Garcia Jr. from Rivals. Mr. Garcia, sir, how are you today?
I'm doing well. Just trying to catch up on the money happenings. It's as big a deal, if not bigger, than really any story that we cover nowadays. So it is really important to try to figure out how the dust has settled and obviously what that means now and into the future.
Yeah, I was surprised because I'd stated numerous times this is 3-4 years away. These lawyers know how to hold everything up in court. And then out of the blue, oh, by the way, we're going to have an announcement tomorrow. Like that was 2 days ago. And then I was going through looking at all these different articles, Pat Forty and everybody else, and it's ironclad. In my opinion, Florida State and Clemson won handedly. I don't think it's competitive because for those who don't know, if they wanted to, I don't think they'll do this. It's only $175 million to leave after this next season. Secondarily, in 2030, they could leave for $75 million. Just exit the conference. And more importantly, why they were in the lawsuit in the first place is the money, how it is reined in from each program. This is where it's wild. I sent John a chart a little bit ago, and we'll talk some about it here on the show. But you're going to get paid based on your TV performance, the eyeballs. Florida State makes 3 times as many people come to watch games as, say, Duke and Wake Forest, Boston College. Now they will be compensated for 60% of that revenue is based on TV eyeballs. So I'm guessing give or take $20 million a year, John, in addition to what they're making now for Clemson and Florida State, while other schools are probably going to take pretty substantial step back. How do you think you would spend, pick whichever school? Again, the money is going to be almost identical because their eyeballs are very, very close based on TV over the last decade or so. How would you look at it from a recruiting perspective? How much of the extra $20 million, let's just use that as a round number, would you spend towards recruiting, and how would you do it?
Well, first, without spending $1, I would try to make this very transparent for recruits. If I'm Dabo Swinney, if I'm Mike Norvell, I say, hey, tangibly, the conference you're looking at playing in knows that we are the top dog. We are literally pulling in more money, more eyeballs because we command X in this market. So I think at those two schools, you can now sell beyond perception. Hey, Miami's the hottest team, but they're behind us in these tangible dollar categories, which at the end of the day is really what makes all of it go. So I think those two schools have that to their advantage. And look, the ACC needs them. I mean, it's no secret, right? I mean, you talk about the last, 4 or 5 national titles coming from that conference on the football field, Florida State and Clemson, right? I mean, it's really simple when you sort of zoom out and take a closer look at it. And then it still gives those two programs an out in a few years if they still, feel the same about potentially leaving the conference. So I think this is a huge win for both FSU and Clemson, and it's going to be sold on the recruiting trail because beyond just the dollar amounts, what are these recruits looking for? They want stability. They want to know their brand can be built at a school. They want to have the visibility in the eyeballs. So when the viewer numbers and the dollar numbers, reach a certain point and you're tangibly above the rest of an entire league and an expanded league as of last year, I think that will be sold very tangibly on the recruiting trail, especially, looking at Florida State, Miami, especially in that type of battle, because we know Florida State has to recruit South Florida to be great, to return to that level. And any benefit you have over Miami, you have to use and almost hammer down. And I think this one is going to be one, again, tangibly that you can start the conversation with. And there's not many bullets like that Mike Norvell has had against Mario Cristobal on the trail over the last 3 years, but now this is a clear and tangible one and an advantage for FSU in particular.
Yeah, I think the eyeball thing is a big factor for, hey, man, you want to go where they're going to have people in the stands, people watch TV because they want to see you in our helmet. Nothing against Miami, but like they don't sell out, etc. Those conversations happen all the time in recruiting. We hear about them all the time. So it's interesting. But to seeing the money difference and what you can do, just from a Florida State perspective, Doak Campbell is supposed to be, and I'm a glass half empty guy, but supposed to be ready for the Bama game. They got that. Now you're going to get extra money too. So I saw a chart a couple of days ago. Georgia in like 2022 spent like $4 million just on recruiting. Like nobody else was even in the stratosphere. Florida State was almost half as much. And you're trying to compete with Georgia head to head constantly. So I'm sure some of that cash on the hotels and the restaurants, how the parents are flown in and all that stuff will happen too. But my big take, and this is something you and I talk about constantly, and a lot of people don't understand this, back office. When you're going to lose people when you do well. I don't care who you are, you're going to lose people. Ask Marcus Freeman up at Notre Dame. They lost like their whole staff after this year because everybody came in and poached them and gave them these huge contracts. You have to be able to replace them. Well, I think, John, that having $20 million around probably going to help that a little bit.
It helps.
To that point, this is a great transition. There's the general manager spot. That's the hot topic in our industry. But you still have to have a quote unquote pure, in my opinion, recruiting analyst / somebody that is the finalizer in addition to the head coach that stays in contact with everybody. That is their jobs. It's two separate entities. I think now Clemson and Florida State will have more money to not only have those roles, but have more people under them. And if they lose one to Southern Cal or Texas or whoever's throwing around cash, the next person's just as good because they have that pocket full of cash to do it. Explain to people why the recruiting analyst role in the back office is so important, and the staff for that matter.
Well, look, I mean, there's so many more layers and elements to roster building today than there were even 3 or 4 years ago, right? You've got to not only recruit the rising senior high school class, but let's be honest, you're recruiting the rising junior class, in a lot of cases, the rising sophomore class, and in some cases, the rising freshman class. I mean, it is truly a deep and layered process just at the high school level. But as we know, it's not just about the high school level. These GMs are being viewed as, and sometimes paid as, NFL GMs, right? And that job is the total roster construction, which means the portal, it means high school, it means roster maintenance, right? You're still dealing with holding on to your own guys. So you've got to start separating and layering these roles out, because if Michael Lombardi at North Carolina is trying to make sure Bryce Baker stays for 2, 3, 4 years, he can't be calling the rising sophomore tight end who's blowing up down the road, in Lincolnton, North Carolina. He can't do both of those things. So keeping it separated to a degree makes a lot of sense, because we're still learning about the front end of it, the portal element, the roster management, the maintenance element of it. We're still learning a lot about it. How often are these coaches wanting to sit down with their current roster to say, hey, how's it going? How you feeling? How's mom and dad? How's everything? Because some of these portal decisions are spur of the moment, it seems like. And then obviously there's the tampering element. There's multiple portal windows. There's so much with just that part of it that you can't throw it all on one person like you used to when it was just about, hey, you're in charge of high school recruiting and sprinkle in a little bit of junior college. And that's kind of it. No, it's several different layers now, and you're doing multiple jobs at the same time, right? You're dealing with it at once as opposed to, in a segmented manner. So yeah, the more money you have, the more positions you can create, the more leverage you can throw into those positions so that your executives can delegate where they need to and put their personal touch where they need to at the same time.
Yeah, it's a really hard situation for one person to handle. Now, I don't think it's fair, not only to the individual, but to the school. You're cutting yourself in the long run. If you don't spend an extra $400,000 a year, you'll end up losing $10 million by not going to the playoff. That's kind of how I look at it. So when we come back on that same front with money, we're going to discuss how NIL and Notre Dame are changing. That is next here on The Portal. Get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades, Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy to use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400 plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage. Now it's your turn. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. John, NIL is something that you and I talk about all the time, whether we're on this podcast, talking on the phone, see you doing something with somebody else in another pod. NIL is everywhere. And the position that most often is associated with is quarterback, rightfully so. But the other one that most people don't realize just how hard it is for schools is defensive line. And that has been Notre Dame's bugaboo, if you will, because they don't get the elite D tackles. They don't want to spend the money on it. But I have heard that they're making a shift with NIL in general with recruiting. So I kind of want to help educate people like just how hard it is to get D tackles. First off, we talk about them all the time in recruiting rankings. And secondarily, what is the market for it? So I'm just going to use an example from the last cycle. I know Justice Terry got over $1 million to go to Texas, and Georgia offered him over $1 million to didn't get him. What do you think the market's going to be like for D tackles, and should Notre Dame jump into that realm? Take it away, my friend.
Yeah, look, those are high school defensive linemen. Let's make that clear. In the portal, the market is often larger for a shorter period of time, but it is what it is, right? So I think, yeah, the onus for big bodies on the interior who can move is always been a premium in the sport. But we're again looking at the last several national champions. You go, Ohio State, Michigan, Georgia. You're talking about truly elite players on the defensive front across the board. And it means you've got interior guys who can hold up against the run. I think, just look at the NFL, right? With the Philadelphia Eagles, that dominant defensive line, they didn't have to blitz, right? They didn't have to blitz to put that pressure on Patrick Mahomes. So you're allowed to sit back and make it that much harder on him. So if you have elite defensive linemen who can create that pressure versus the run and the pass and hold up without needing extra help schematically or needing linebackers to come help fill the gaps or occupy blockers, etc., you've got as big an advantage as possible, right? I mean, we're talking about the greatest quarterback of a generation looking very pedestrian, in football's biggest stage, so these players can truly wreck a game. Yeah, I think, the term freak or game wrecker probably overused in today's lexicon with football, but these guys are truly the game wreckers because they've got the shortest amount of space to make an impact, right? You talk about a Jalen Carter with the Eagles. You just look at any elite program, that interior guy. I mean, he's working between a 5 and 10 yard radius against a blocker, and the quarterback's there, the running back's there. I mean, the whole game is there. So it sounds simple on the forefront, but when you zoom out, that is where the money truly lies. And I think that's why you see a bit, and not only a renaissance in emphasizing the run, but also emphasizing how to stop it, with big bodies, on the preliminary front, so as you go forward, yeah, and you want those guys to pass rush, you want those guys to be 3-down players. And if you find one, which is rare, the market, sort of resets itself. I mean, look at Chris Jones, look at some of these Jeffrey Simmons, these great players at these positions at the highest of levels. Their contracts aren't into the millions or tens of millions. They get into the hundreds of millions. So you start to, factor all that down to the high school recruiting ranks and eventually the NIL ranks and the transfer portal. And those numbers start to bubble up in a hurry as well. So yeah, it's just hard to find human beings of a certain size that can move at a certain pace. So naturally those markets get crazy and those recruitments become unexpected. I thought you mentioned the perfect player, Justice Terry, this is a guy, South Georgia, longtime Georgia fan, early Georgia commit. The whole world thought he was going to end up back at Georgia when all was said and done. He took a visit to USC, committed out there. A lot of people thought it would be short term. It ended up being short term, opened it back up, and then boom, Georgia's right there in the thick of it once again. But in the end, you talk about what Texas was able to do from an NIL perspective, combined with their recent pedigree in the playoff, and all these things start to line up and say, well, maybe it's not a one-team race here. And in the end, Texas did win out for Justice Terry. So you can see why there is so much more emphasis on these players, and even clear locks or clear paths to one school become a little bit more diluted, because that is just how much or how hard it is, to find guys like that. And I thought Terry was a great example you brought up.
So should Notre Dame at least every couple of years say to heck with it and take one? Because their stance has been, and this has been Clemson and some other schools too, we don't want to irritate the locker room. We're worried that once you get here, somebody else, if you have a good season, will come and get them. It's 6 one way, half dozen the other for me. I get the perspective, but your point, Bama, Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State. If you go through and look at the teams that have won it recently, how many of them didn't have a first or second round pick at D tackle? 0?
Yeah, I mean, go back 10 years. I mean, go look at those Clemson teams with Dexter Lawrence and Brian Brzee. I mean, it really is every single team with, it's usually a multiple guys that you end up bringing up. So I think that is probably going to answer the question for Notre Dame. And look, if you're the Irish and you can bring in a Riley Leonard, a face of the program at quarterback, and it doesn't disturb the entire deal, because, I'm sure his pockets are pretty solid at this point, I think you could do it with a big ugly on the defensive interior for sure.
That's kind of how I look at it. And I'm curious to see what they do. They've taken some portal guys. I got a kid from Louisville that's really good. They took a kid from SC, but they're not dominant players. So I'm curious if they change that on the high school level. John, to that point with NIL, before we transition to Under Armour, do you think we're in a cycle now, whether it's Notre Dame, SC, Texas, Georgia, whatever, where we're going to see more money for high school kids, D-tackle or otherwise?
Yeah, absolutely. I think those numbers have only climbed. Remember 2 years ago, we thought $500,000 was a lot for a high school quarterback. And then 2 years ago came and the number went up to $1 million. And then this past cycle, you saw the reports, right? I mean, you're talking, an exponential rise for the very, very best. So if that's happening at QB, which is always, the leading cause of any transition in the sport, it's going to start happening elsewhere. And yeah, you could argue it's harder to find a great interior defensive lineman than it might be to find a college-ready quarterback in this day and age. So if that continues to even be a conversation, the numbers are going to rise for the positions you would expect: offensive tackle, defensive tackle, corner, and maybe wide receiver, tight end, is the next position in that bubble of a lot of money. But no doubt after QB, you go straight to the line for those premium guys.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. We like in the portal, if you need an offensive tackle to solidify your next season, good luck. There just aren't many. That's why the high school ranks get so much money for that stuff. When we come back, we're going to talk about the Under Armour event that John and I were just at down in Miami. It was loaded and it was a lot of fun. That is next here on the Portal. Under Armour Miami is something that you and I know every year is going to have a lot of exciting players. But this year, in a backhanded way, we kind of got an extra bonus. Not only did Messiah Hampton come down from New York, which was random, he was awesome. We'll talk about him here in just a minute in multiple ways. But because of the Sevens tournament up in Atlanta the week before, a lot of the kids that would have went to the Orlando Under Armour decided to come down from Central and North Florida to compete down in Miami. So, John, I thought it was as good a Miami camp as we've seen. I don't even know when. I mean, it was elite, and it was deeper at certain spots than normal. Like having more depth at defensive back there is almost impossible. You can make that argument. There were some guys, underclassmen, that were good. Receiver, like I said, Messiah Hampton, I thought he was as good a receiver as there was there. He's a kid from New York. It's really random, but he plays with 24K, 7-on-7. What players stood out to you and why?
Well, I think when we first started looking at the roster and seeing the guys trickle in, I started saying, hey, for Miami, this is as good a quarterback year as we'll ever see, right? You did have your elite locals, right? Bell, South Florida. He was out there, the Texas commit, really his first full workout, since that serious ankle injury that ended his junior season. He looked good out there. A lot of the younger players, in South Florida that already have stars and offers next to their name came out and looked good, whether it was Brady Quinn, James Perrone, Zach Katz, kind of that group. And then, like you said, you had, some guys who traveled in ready to compete. Darion Coleman came down from Orlando and won another MVP. And I think we got to start talking about him as one of the best, runs we've seen at the quarterback position in a 6-month span. November, December, he leads Jones High School to an undefeated state title run where if they played anyone other than American Heritage, they probably win that state title game. Darion was excellent in that game. And then he parlays that into January, battle Miami, MVP. DEFCON goes and wins that tournament. He's gone up to other events and won, high accolades, other 7-on-7 tournaments, and then goes to Miami Under Armour camp where, again, it's sort of a QB heavy event, comes out and wins MVP there. So, I think if he continues that run, Elite 11, et cetera, those things, OT7, you're talking about a Tua Tagovailoa type of offseason in terms of just everyone thought this kid was good, and now everyone thinks this kid is unbelievable. Keelan Russell last offseason, I thought had that kind of run as well. He ended up as a 5-star, #1 recruit in the country for us, at Rivals. So, this could really be a spurring moment for Darion Coleman. So I thought he was impressive, and to do it against that crop of quarterbacks equally as impressive for him. But of course, when you're talking Miami, any Miami event, it goes to the skill positions. You go receivers and you go defensive backs. And I just thought the maturity and the polish these guys brought to the table stood out. Everyone knows that the raw natural athleticism is always on display in Miami. And you saw that at any position, right? Running back, linebacker, certainly, with the edge prospects, et cetera. Jake Krull probably deserves his own shout out. I'm sure you've talked about him plenty this week, but you expect the raw, freaky talent in South Florida. But I thought what stood out was the polish, the maturity that these kids bring to their game. It's not just, hey, I'm running a go route. Can you keep up with my speed? It's not just that. We saw polish. You mentioned Messiah Hampton. He came out. He reminded me a little of Caden Dixon Wyatt, from Mater Dei in California. Big, broad kid, very polished route runner. He wants to flip your leverage and then win again at the top of the route. And he could win at the catch point as well. I liked that about his game. These smaller, shiftier receivers, again, it's not just quickness and speed. It's real route construction. You talk of Jason Lopez, you talk of Larry Miles, you talk of Jeffrey Gerard Noel, who won MVP, the West Virginia commitment. These guys are putting it together. There is a plan, and they're executing that plan. And then we saw it on the flip side as well. Brody Jennings, the Michigan commitment, won MVP. His technique was fantastic throughout the event. He wanted to win back leverage at the top of the route, had the best speed turn of any corner at the event, maybe any corner I've seen in person early this year. So he was able to win back leverage in multiple ways. And that's not just speed and technique, or it's not just speed and natural athleticism. It's technique. It's the film room. It's studying, so I thought the combination of the athleticism with this mature approach that we're seeing with these guys that are just more ready than ever to hit the college level, it was really a fantastic showing all the way through. And fittingly, it was capped by a real, bombs away fest in one-on-ones with these quarterbacks able to put it wherever you need it, these receivers willing to go get it, and these DBs that were able to combat that. So a great event, top to bottom. A ton of coverage, of course, at Rivals, at here on Locked On the Portal. There's a lot to get to, and I get the feeling it's one of those camps, Brian, where you're going to go back and reference guys kind of time and time again. I mean, it was so loaded. You don't even talk about like a Bryson Wright, a 2028 receiver from Jacksonville, who just makes you wonder, how is this kid 2028? He looks like he's in college right now. He's able to win again with not just his immense physical traits at what, 6'3", 200 pounds, but he's out there winning routes, with leverage and steps and timing, not just, that raw speed. So I just really was impressed by the overall group. There were a lot of big time plays, a lot of contested catches, because not only were the receivers good, the DBs were right there. So, Calvin Russell was great. I thought Xavier Larice, the recent Oregon commitment, looked really good. Jaden Broadnax, who's committing very soon, looked very good as well. These are, mostly bigger, longer players. So just a great event and great competition all around.
Yeah, I thought the DB receiver stuff was a lot of fun. Like, everybody wants to see Calvin Russell and stuff, and he was great and all that. But there are guys out there, I'm like, well, who is this one? Who is this? And who? I mean, they're just an insane amount of kids. Like Noel, you mentioned him. Like, I didn't know who he was. He made guys look bad that had elite offers, like beat him 4 or 5 yards. And then you still had guys like Tadarius Hughes and Reese and some of these other guys. If the ball was off, they would pick it and take it the other way. So every play had a chance for something spectacular in the wide receiver DB group. But I do want to mention something that you brought up a minute ago. I can't remember a defensive lineman ever dominating more than Jake Rule at any Under Armour event ever. I don't think he lost a rep. And for those that don't know, he's an IMG kid. He didn't have to go to this because they had their own pro day. So he came down because he wanted to. And not only did he do that, he would steal reps. He'd go at D end, and then they would shift out. He would steal somebody's reps at D tackle. He doesn't even play D tackle, and he would be the guard. John, it was insane. So I gave him props afterwards, talked to him. But if you want to see how hustle plays out and want to, Jake Cruel's picture is next to that in that dictionary, because like, that kid is awesome. Talk about Jake just for a sec.
Yeah, it's like, what more do you want to see? I mean, this kid has been, was kind of billed as a pass rush specialist, right? I had a lot of sacks to his name early on at Bishop Moore Catholic up in Orlando, and then makes the move to IMG last year. And you're like, okay, first of all, shout out to Jake for going through that, just in general, right? That level of competition that is as high as it gets at the high school level. But I think a lot of people wondered, how would he look? How would he do? Well, I went to multiple IMG games last year, and it was more of the same. He was a sack artist, but he also flashed a true motor on the edge for 3 downs. I mean, his run stopping ability, his leverage at the point of attack, at the end of the line of scrimmage, allowed his teammates to fast flow and make plays time and time again against the run. So as he continues to fill out, about 6'2.5", 230 plus pounds right now, as he continues to fill out, that's what he's going to have to deal with. People trying to run at him because he's such a twitchy first step pass rusher that you want to kind of slow that down any way you can. But Jake has showed us, and he cross trains at linebacker a little bit too now. He has shown us that he is built for those different scenarios. So that's why in these settings, you see him working outside against tackles, but you also see him working inside against the bigger, more broad, interior blockers, because he wants, to sort of simulate what he deals with on Friday night. Sometimes it's a tackle and a tight end. Sometimes it's a guard and a tackle double teaming him. So I thought, that ability and that desire to go work, speaks for itself. But obviously the wins are gaudy. There's one thing to win a rep. It's like a receiver, right? It's nice to win 10 to 15 yards in the intermediate game. You're just a very good route runner with good hands. It's nice. It's another thing to win down the field every single time, 40 yards and a cloud of dust with all these touchdowns in these settings. That's what the equivalent of what Jake Cruel is doing on the defensive line. These are gaudy touchdowns, in this case, sacks that are, the quarterback has no chance. I mean, he's able to bend, dip, and rip so low and maintain his balance that these 6'7", 6'6" offensive tackles, they can't get down there. They can't reach the plane that Cruel is pushing them on. And then on the other side of it, he's got an inside spin move. He's got great hands. He's got quick hands. He gets on you and puts pressure on you from the jump. So if you can't redirect, you'll lose, and you'll lose in bad fashion. So he has that ability to embarrass blockers, and we've seen it now for years to his name. So yeah, I get to the point, and we'll talk about this at Rivals. We have a rankings meeting coming up. At what point have you seen enough? At what point are you sort of just comfortable with the evaluation. Hey, this kid just jacks up everything you want to do from an offensive standpoint. He don't look the part. He could be longer. I think there's clear knocks against the measurables if you want to really nitpick with Jake Krull, but for where he is as a junior from a pass rushing perspective, it's as polished and as buttoned up as maybe I've ever scouted. And I'm 15 years into this thing.
Yeah, I agree. Jake has really earned it. One last player I just wanted to mention, and you'd thrown him out before the event, Mr. Dobson, Miami, New Orleans, the young DB. He's a kid. Bryson Wright, the receiver, is freakish. Those two guys are why teams come to Florida looking to change their program. You get somebody like Dobson, Broadnax is another kid. The length and the athleticism at the skill spots in Florida is gross. It's just absolutely insane. Explain to everybody what you like about Dobson and why you brought him up to me.
Well, look, he's a kid who's built like he's, again, already at the next level. And this is a 2027 recruit, probably 6 foot, 190 pounds or so, verified, 10-8 guy on the track. But really it's just advanced technique. Yes, he can run. Yes, he's physical. Yes, he can beat you at the line of scrimmage and not let you off. But there's also just advanced technique here. Guy who plays with South Florida Express on the 7-on-7 circuit. And he's CB1, not the older guys, not Broadnax, some of these older guys on that roster. It's Dobson, and he's been that at that position for multiple years now. So I just think there's just an advancement to his game that, is going to lead to not only a very contested recruitment, which is probably, 30 offers plus at this point, but it's going to have a lot of people wondering, hey, is this guy day one ready no matter where he goes, and the more you see him, I think the more closer you get, to that point where you say you feel really comfortable about him as a truly elite cover guy, both in the classic sense that he can say, hey, it's me versus you, let's go. But also in the maturity sense, hey, you're going to play a lot of zone. You're going to play a lot of underneath. Can you play the boundary? Can you flip your hip, speed, turn, and win the third? I think he can do all of those things. And there's just not that many guys this young that display all of those traits.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a kid, just kind of looking at him just on the hoof, you're like, okay, unless he just loses his mind off the field and does some bad stuff, that's a top 25 recruit. My guess for the class of 27. So Mr. Dobson will be next up, and he's from Miami, New Orleans. John, where can everybody find your work?
Yeah, real simple, rivals.com. New month, new rankings are out this week, so check them out.
All right. I appreciate it. You can find the Portal Podcast wherever you get your pods. The Portal Podcast is live every day, all the time. So make sure you check us out, like and subscribe. We will see you again soon here on the Portal.